Hey everyone, it's Sarah, and today I am back with a subscriber requested video. So I was recently asked, and when I say recently, I mean like yesterday, and I immediately pulled out these fragrances because I was like, what a fun idea. So I was recently, as in yesterday, requested to do a My Fragrance Journey video. I don't know if this is something that other reviewers are doing, and maybe this person just wanted to see mine, but either way, I pulled all of these fragrances immediately, and yeah, I'm sitting down to film today, so I'm super excited. I've got in front of me like fragrances not only that I remember and have still from my childhood, but different signatures like through the years, and it's pretty funny like what I'm seeing in front of me. But anyways, I'm gonna jump right in. I could not start this video with anything other than talking about probably the most memorable fragrance to me. It's the first perfume that I ever remember smelling on my mom. She had a walk-in closet at the time, and I remember being a little girl just going into her closet and looking. My dad used to buy her all of these beautiful clothes, beautiful boots. I mean, it was the 80s, so these really beautiful like boots, jackets. He would buy her things out of boutiques, like really expensive clothing. And I remember as a kid just going into and my mom was like super fashionable. She just was a beautiful woman. She still is, but yeah, so I remember going into her closet and looking at all of her beautiful clothing and getting into her jewelry box and going through all her jewelry and getting into her perfume and spraying on her perfume. And this is the perfume that I would spray on. She wore Poison. She had both of these. She had Poison and she had Tendre Poison. My bottle of Poison is from 1986. It still smells incredible. It's definitely aged, and it's not as fresh smelling as what I remember from as a child, but it still smells like it still brings back those scent memories. I remember as a kid thinking that it somewhat smelled like grape juice. And I still don't think that I'm wrong. I mean, there is kind of like this grapey quality to it, but it's beautiful. It's syrupy and spiced and rich, so rich. They just don't make fragrances like this anymore. So yeah, this is like my first fragrance memory. The first fragrance that I really remember being just enamored with. Spraying it on as like a child, spraying way too much on. Yeah, just having a love affair with it. So, and it reminding me of my mom. So that is Poison. And then she also eventually got Tendre Poison. And Tendre Poison is stunning. It's clean. It reminds me somewhat of, I hope you can't hear my daughter and her friend back there. Let me go close the door. It reminds me a little bit of Pure Poison. It's definitely got Tendre Poison. It's like a clean version of Poison. It's, yeah, it still smells very 80s, but it definitely gives me Pure Poison vibes. It doesn't have, I don't believe it's got the same types of flowers in it, but it still has that really beautiful, clean vibe. So yeah, I remember this, but though I love this and I remember it, it brings back memories of my mom. It cannot compare to the original Poison for me, just because it doesn't evoke the same kinds of feelings that the original Poison does. But I still love it. Okay, so the next fragrance that I would talk about, or that I will talk about, is Electric Youth from Debbie Gibson. That is the first fragrance that I remember falling in love with and owning multiple bottles of it. Like, I had it in different forms, different versions. I had the square tall bottle. I had this round, like, little spray bottle thing. I'll throw pictures up here for you. Yeah, it smelled incredible to me back then. I can't really describe what it smelled like. Like, even though I could still, sitting here, I can still kind of smell it. But I loved it. When I was about my daughter's age, I was like obsessed with Debbie Gibson. I thought she was the coolest thing ever. I remember for Christmas, I got like an aqua colored little boombox and a Debbie Gibson tape for Christmas. And I carried my little boombox around playing Debbie Gibson tape over and over and over again. I knew every single word of every song. Like, I was obsessed. And then when she came out with that perfume, oh my gosh, it was like over. I had to have it. Another fragrance, there are a couple fragrances here that I want to talk about that I don't have, so I will throw up pictures for you. I will also throw up notes and things. The next fragrance I would say that I had that I loved, I had a little collection of fragrances when I was a kid. So I had Electric Youth, I had Malibu Musk in the spray can that was like a body spray. That freaking body spray performed better than most EDPs on the market today. That thing was so strong, you could spray it on and you would smell like Malibu Musk all day. You got it at the drugstore. Yeah, so I had that in the spray can. I absolutely loved it. I also had, so I'm going to talk about, there's another one I want to talk about that I don't have, but it came after this one. So I also had Samba. Now, my original Samba, this one smells very, very similar to the original Samba. This has been reformulated, but it's still so close to the original Samba. This thing is an absolute beast. I sprayed this on the other night before bed, and it literally made me sick because I sprayed way too much on, thinking that it was going to be like diluted and just not the same. Boy, was I wrong. I literally made myself sick. But Samba is beautiful. It's kind of soapy, floral. It's very 80s smelling. Yeah, I still love this. Yeah, next time I'm going to use a much lighter hand though. I do remember my original bottle though, the bottle was actually like a light lavender color, and I think my cap was pink. I think, if I can remember correctly. I'll try to find a picture of the original Samba, but yeah, I was so happy to see that they still made it. I also wore back then and had Exclamation. So this is another one that I keep just for nostalgic reasons. To me, it's like this has been reformulated too. It still smells like Exclamation, but I don't know. It's just not the same. None of them are the same. Like, there was just something special about fragrances in the 80s. And this is still pretty strong. This is kind of clean, sweet. I will, of course, have notes on the screen for you. Maybe a little bit flowery, maybe even a touch powdery. I loved Exclamation though. This is another one I went through several bottles of. And I just love having the bottle in my collection. It just makes me happy. I also had Charlie White. This was my favorite of all of the Charlies. This is the original formulation too. I had to track this down. If you find this, you have to be careful. If you're looking for the original formulation, you have to look for something very specific because the new one is a reformulation, and I don't think it smells like this anymore. But yeah, this brings me back. Mine is almost off. I don't want to say it's cheaply made, but it's cheaply made. And yeah, it's not holding up to age well, but I can still smell Charlie White in there. But I absolutely loved this fragrance. It was one of my favorites. I, again, went through bottles of it. And then in between those two and the next, I had a fragrance by United Colors of Benetton called Tribu. I went through bottles of that fragrance. I adored it. I thought it was the most stunning fragrance I had ever smelled. there was just something there was something almost like kind of sporty smelling about it. I remember that being one of the first fragrances that, I don't know, I just thought it smelled really different, really classy. It just smelled beautiful. I have tried to track down vintage bottles of it, and you can, but it's very, very expensive. You can find minis, but people want an arm and a leg for them. So it's like, ugh. And they probably have gone off because, again, probably not the highest quality ingredients. So after Tribu came Fire and Ice, and this was a middle school fragrance for me. So yeah, I wore this in middle school. I loved this fragrance. It still smells amazing. Mine is a vintage bottle. This is the original formulation. And it still smells so good. And this brings back so many memories because Revlon made a shampoo called Outrageous. And it smelled exactly like Fire and Ice. So I actually think that Outrageous came out before the perfume did. So yeah, I remember it was one or the other, and I remember just being stoked. I used Outrageous shampoo for years, as long as they ever made it, because I loved it so much. But anyways, that is Fire and Ice. It's really, really beautiful. It's yeah, this is a beautiful floral. It's kind of like an ambery floral. It's really, really gorgeous. Mine, again, it's super, super old because this is an original bottle. But you can still smell, and the top notes of basically are all but gone, but you can still smell the base of it. It dries down to smell exactly like what it used to, or what I remember. I love this fragrance. So I wore that in middle school. Also, just going into middle school, my mom started wearing this fragrance called L'effleur, and I loved this. This was a drugstore fragrance. So yeah, she went from wearing Poison and things like that. She also wore Rive Gauche by YSL, but she went from wearing fragrances like that to drugstore fragrances. But back then, drugstore fragrances were really, really good. And they lasted forever. This, again, is an original formulation. This is an original bottle. And I love this. Whoa. It's another one that the top notes are all but gone. It's kind of gone off. But I can still kind of smell it. And this one I keep mostly for the bottle because the bottle itself is what brings me back. It's just, my mom was really into this like Victorian looking stuff too. She was like really into it. So anyways, just a gorgeous fragrance. Okay, so moving on from middle school. And middle school was kind of a weird time for me. I didn't have quite as many fragrances as I had when I was younger. Yeah, and then high school became more about signature scents. Like, I wore signature scents. So I had 3 that I wore. Another girl that I was friends with started wearing it. This is the first one I'm going to talk about. So I quit wearing this pretty quickly and moved on. But I used to wear Vanilla Fields. I loved this fragrance. It was just such a beautiful, like, floral, sweet vanilla. I just loved it. There's something, it's kind of dense smelling. It's very, I don't know. It just smelled very grown up to me too. I just thought it was so beautiful. So that was Vanilla Fields. I only wore that for a very short period of time. And then I moved on to Ralph Lauren Polo Sport. So I remember when this first came out and how in love I was with this. I went through bottles of Polo Sport. I mean, I probably went through 5 or 6 bottles of it over a couple years. I loved it. This is another one that it's pretty much gone off, but I can still smell Like I can still smell it. It smells, yeah, actually it's not even gone off that much. Like the top notes are gone, but the base is still there and it still smells just like what I remember. But yeah, I adored Polo Sport. I went through bottles and bottles and bottles of it. I was into these kind of sporty aquatic scents when I was in high school. I don't know why, because I was kind of like a rocker chick. I was really into, you know, well, not a rocker chick. I was more of like a grunge girl. I was really into grunge. I was really into the grunge scene, music and bands and stuff like that. So the fact that I wore these weird, like sporty aquatic scents, it just, the two don't mix at all, but leave it to me. Okay, so the second fragrance that I had, this was kind of in my later high school years. This is my signature scent. This is Coolwater from Davidoff Coolwater Women. And this smells exactly the same as it always has. Yeah, this is a new bottle too. I don't think this has been reformulated. Honestly, it smells exactly the same. So yeah, this smells exactly how I remember it. It might have been reformulated, but I don't think it has. I mean, it really smells. I shouldn't say that because I've never given this a full wear test. Like, it's not one of those fragrances that I think I'm ever going to be able to wear again. I might try it out. But I literally wore this like 365 days a year for years, like 2 or 3 years probably. Oh, I just realized I forgot a fragrance. But yeah, I would need to give this a really good wear test to see how it performs. If it still performs really well, because this is a beast. Polo Sport was a beast. Every fragrance that I wore back in the day was an absolute beast. I could put it on in the morning before I went to school and I would still smell like it. Like I would smell like it all day. So yeah, this was no exception. Again, I don't know how it performs. I don't know if it's been reformulated or what, but Coolwater from Davidoff. And then in my last year of high school, actually no, I think it was, yeah, I think I started wearing this the year that after I graduated high school. So I think I was like 19, 18, right after high school. I started wearing Tommy Girl. That's when this fragrance came out. This is an old bottle. This is a little half-ounce bottle. This is the original formulation. It is an old bottle. Yeah. It still smells, my bottle is still really good. It still smells exactly like I remember. It's, Tommy Girl was the first kind of fruity, yeah, really kind of fruity fragrance. It had a real fruitiness to it. There's a fruit note in this that is very prominent, and it's like I can't think of exactly what it is. Maybe peach. It might even be peach, but I don't know. I will, of course, have all the notes on the screen. But yeah, I wore Tommy Girl the year after I graduated high school. I probably wore this for a couple of years too. I went through a couple bottles of it. Yeah, I probably wore it for a couple of years. Okay, then we're going to get into the early 2000s. So actually, this next one is from 1999. So this was after Tommy Girl. Yeah, this was after Tommy Girl. I was living in California for about 6 months, and I had moved back home to Washington State again. I was working in a department store. It was called the Bon Marché, but it's Macy's now, I believe. And this is the fragrance that the department store smelled like when you walked in, because it had just come out. This was like the it fragrance. This is what everybody was wearing. This is what, when all of us would get into work in the morning, or whenever we would get into work, we would stop by the perfume counter and spray this on. It was just like what we all wanted to smell like. This is a very, very bright citrus fragrance with a very, very prominent green tomato leaf note. I really get tomato leaf more than anything. This is like a true tomato leaf fragrance. I loved this. And it's funny because when I was working at that department store, it was over Christmas time, and I worked in like the gift wrap area. It was called the cash office and gift wrap area, and I worked back there. And so even though this is such a warm weather fragrance, this is like super tart citrus and green tomato leaf, it reminds me of Christmas, because that is the time period that I was working at the Bon, and I would spray this on all the time. And so yeah, this reminds me of citrus, or of Christmas. It also reminds me, this is hilarious, in the, I forget what the juniors section was called in the Bon. It had its own name, like the juniors section, the juniors girls, and the juniors guys section had their own like names, and they had like music videos playing on TVs all around the junior section. And it was when that Jessica Simpson had just come out, and she was like super popular, and they were playing her videos like all the time. And I remember the song that she did with Nick Lachey, and I think they did it for a movie. Maybe the movie, I think, was called Here on Earth. I'm going to take you guys on a trip to the past talking about this stuff. But yeah, I think it was a movie called Here on Earth with Chris something, I can't remember, and Lily Sobieski. I will never forget. But anyways, Nick Lachey and Jessica Simpson did a song that was even before they were married. It was like when they were still just dating. They did a song that was constantly playing in that junior section. So this perfume reminds me of that too. It's such a blast. I can literally just smell this, and it will take me on a trip to like the far distant past. It's crazy. So anyways, that is DKNY Women. Boy, you didn't know you were going to get a life history from me, did you? Okay. So after that time period, I just started wearing some random things. I remember after that, I had just moved out here to South Carolina and encountered a Gap outlet for the first time. That's another fragrance that I wore as well. Right after I wore DKNY Women, I wore Gap So Pink. I loved that fragrance. I'll throw a picture up here of that as well. But yeah, I went through a Gap So Pink phase in the early 2000s. I also wore this fragrance. I just recently found this on, I think, FragranceNet. They had some of these Gap perfumes. These are old. Yeah, I had a bottle of this one in the early 2000s, right after I had So Pink. This is called Lavender Tea. This is beautiful. And this was a real departure for me, because this is a really soft, kind of powdery, very soothing lavender fragrance. It's really, really gorgeous, and it was very much a departure for me. So yeah, I wore this one a lot in the early 2000s. I wore other fragrances. I wore a lot of fragrances from Origins, because I went through an Origins phase where I was buying and wearing different Origins fragrances. I wore the Ginger, I think it was called Ginger Up at the time, but I would get the body souffle and the perfume, and I would layer that, and I wore that for, I think, a good solid year. That was like my signature. I just wore the Ginger fragrance from Origins for a long time. My mom and I went through a phase though where we were wearing Origins fragrances. So there was also one called Spring Something that was beautiful. That was like my mom's signature for a little while, and it was a stunning fragrance. But yeah, so I was wearing those for a while, and then came Burberry. This I wore probably from 2002 to maybe 2000. This was my signature until Stella came out. I can't remember what year Stella came out. I want to say maybe 2006, 2005. Yeah, actually, I think this came out, it could have even been 2004. 2004, 2005. But I wore Burberry from, I think, about 2002 to about 2004. This was my signature scent. I wore it summer, winter, all day, every day. This was my signature. I loved this. This really reminded me of just like a cozy sweater. This is the original formulation. This has been reformulated. The new formulation, the peach note, is sickening in it. I don't like peach in fragrance anyways, but the new formulation, the peach, is just out of hand for me. But this, you can barely smell the peach at all. This has just this beautiful fuzziness to it. It really does smell like a warm, cozy sweater, and I absolutely loved it. And I wore it for years, and I went through bottles and bottles of it. So that is Burberry, just plain old Burberry for her. I then, Gwen Stefani started coming out with fragrances right around the time that, I guess, it was right around the time I was wearing Burberry. And this was my favorite one. I wouldn't say that this was ever a signature for me. I never wore this like as a signature scent, but I loved it, and I would wear it like here and there whenever I just got sick of like whatever I was wearing, whether it be Burberry or Stella. This was just kind of an in-between fragrance. But yeah, this is Harajuku Lovers Music. It was my favorite from this line. It's still beautiful. This is the original bottle that my mom and I had and shared, and this is still the exact same formulation. But you can see how very little I actually used it because it's still super, super full. This is the original bottle though from the early 2000s that we had. Early mid 2000s. It smells incredible even still. It hasn't gone off. It hasn't changed at all. It smells exactly like it used to. It's really, really beautiful. So that is Harajuku Lovers Music from Gwen Stefani. Then I went through this phase. It was like when I was getting into like my mid-20s, and getting into my mid-20s was really hard for me. Like mentally, I wasn't ready for it. I was aging, but mentally I wasn't aging. I still felt like I had just gotten out of high school. Like I was still, 19 or 20. And so I went through this phase where I just wanted to start smelling way younger. Whereas I had been wearing, actually, this came after Stella. So I had been wearing fragrances like Burberry, and then my next signature after Burberry, and I am kicking myself for not having saved one of my original bottles of Stella. But I remember when this very first launched and I was in Sephora, I smelled it in a Sephora. I fell absolutely head over heels in love with it. And still to this day, this is one of my very favorite rose fragrances. There is something about this fragrance that is just unique. And a lot of people say a lot of other fragrances smell like this, but I have never smelled another fragrance that actually smells like Stella. This is a beautiful ambery rose. It's dark. The original formulation was very dark smelling. It was like a beautiful dark ambery rose. I adored this fragrance. I still do. This is one of my old signatures that still to this day, like it could be my signature again because I still love it that much. It's one of my favorite fragrances of all time. I just adore it. But yeah, I went through bottles and bottles of this, and it was so expensive back then too. But yeah, I must have gone through at least 4 bottles of Stella, and I just wish, thank goodness to my lovely, lovely friend who sent over a little mini of the original formulation, and I'm so happy to have just that little bit so that I can smell it and I can experience that on my skin again. Because this reformulation, it smells 99% the way that it used to, or the same, but the performance is so bad. Performance is dismal compared to what it used to be, but anyways, Stella is probably my favorite signature scent that I've ever had. And then after wearing Burberry and Stella for so many years, like I said, I went through this phase where like I was getting older and I didn't like it, and I wanted to smell youthful, really young. I didn't want to smell mature. I didn't want to smell grown at all. So I went through a Britney Spears fantasy phase. This is the first celebrity fragrance that I had ever purchased. This is the stage edition. So but this is the original formulation of Fantasy. So if you get Fantasy now, it's been reformulated. It's got a lot more kiwi in it. It's got a lot less of the cupcakey, like icing kind of note. But Stage Edition is the original formulation of Fantasy. So that's why I keep a bottle of the Stage Edition. I do have a pen spray of the reformulated Fantasy, and I do still really like it. But it's not this. So this is beautiful. This is, oh my gosh, and this brings me back. I also was wearing this when I moved out of my mom's house for the first time, and I was living in a little tiny dumpy apartment all by myself, and I felt so like grown because it was the first time that I had ever really, well, no, I had been on my own in California, so it wasn't the first time I had been on my own, but I had never lived by myself before. But anyways, this just reminds me of, yeah, living in this tiny little kind of dumpy apartment all by myself. I was working full-time. I was going to college full-time. And yeah, and I think that was another thing. Like, I was like 25 and still trying to finish up college. And I felt super old because I was going to college with, kids that had just gotten out of high school. But anyways, I went through my Britney Spears fantasy phase, and yeah, I love this. So this reminds me of a very particular time in my life. Let's see here. Okay. And then after Stage Edition, I went back to Stella again, and I wore Stella for another couple or few years. So yeah, Fantasy was like a break in between Stella. And then after Stella came Hypnotic Poison. So I love Hypnotic Poison. I have the original formulation as well, which I absolutely adore. This is beautiful. It's almond and tonka and jasmine. It's got a little bit of licorice in it. It's warm. It's rich. It's ambery smelling. I just love this. I wore this. It was my signature. I wore it day, night, fall, winter, spring, summer. I didn't care. I wore this. I started wearing this, I want to say, in like 2008. And I wore this like as a true signature scent for probably until 2012. So this was a signature scent for me for about 4 years. I adored this. Now, I did wear other fragrances in between. I'll talk about one of the other fragrances that I did wear. But yeah, I adored this. That's when during that time period, I was working for Starbucks. I was living by myself. I made really good money. I really was just kind of doing my own thing. And I was going to see Muse in concert. Any time that they were anywhere near, I was going to see Muse. I also flew home to Seattle to see them because they were performing at the Key Arena in Seattle, and I flew home to see them. This came with me. So this just reminds me of that time period, and this was my signature scent when I met my husband. So yeah, this reminds me of just really good times, and of meeting my husband. So Hypnotic Poison was a signature. And then right after Hypnotic Poison, or kind of simultaneously, or really no, kind of near the end of my Hypnotic Poison days, I found a bottle of Escada Moon Sparkle at TJ Maxx one day. It was a blind buy. I honestly thought the bottle was stunning, so I was like, well, I'm going to buy that. It just looks really pretty. I've never been the biggest fan of Escada fragrances, especially this line, these kind of summertime fragrances, but I remember getting home and smelling this and spraying it on and loving it. Just absolutely loving it. It's so sweet and sugary and beautiful, but it's not a fruity. It's like, I think it does have fruits in it, but it's not overly fruity like a lot of the other Escada fragrances are. I don't know. In my opinion, this is the best one they've ever done, that like in this kind of bottle. It's just beautiful. So I also wore this as kind of a signature when I met my husband, and then he loved this, so I kind of backed off on the Hypnotic Poison and started wearing Moon Sparkle almost exclusively. Like, I would still wear Hypnotic Poison, but I would wear Moon Sparkle more because my husband, my then boyfriend, my now husband, really, really enjoyed this. So yeah, and then I wore these Escada Moon Sparkle and Hypnotic Poison up until about the time that Charlotte was born. And then after about 2012, I would say right around 2013, my kind of perfume addiction started. So I've had, back then I didn't have this size of a collection, but I had a lot of fragrances. I had a lot of fragrances from indie houses. I just had a lot of perfumes. I was buying a lot. I was much better about buying samples and small sizes than I am now, buying full bottles. But yeah, 2013 is when things kind of went downhill as far as me, just my perfume addiction started. And I have never had a signature scent again since that time, since 2012. There's never been one perfume that I've worn a ton, except, gosh, this is going to be a long video. So there are two fragrances that I did wear quite a bit. I became kind of obsessed with these two fragrances over about a year. And even though I had a ton of other fragrances at the time, these were the two that I was wearing most exclusively. So I was wearing Replica by the Fireplace, and I never, well, back then I wasn't making very much money because I'd only been at BMW for a couple of years, and you don't really start making good money there until you've been there for 5 years, which I just hit my 5 years the same week that I quit. But anyways, yeah, I could never afford a full bottle of By the Fireplace, so I would buy the pen sprays from Sephora because they were only like 28 bucks, and I could, and you don't need a lot of this. You only need a few sprays, and it's a beast. It'll get you through easily a 10-hour day. So yeah, I wore By the Fireplace a lot, like a whole lot. Almost like a signature for about a year. And then I also wore Nirvana Bourbon from Elizabeth and James. Gosh, I love this, and it brings back so many memories of just like when Charlotte was little and how much I used to wear this. So yeah, I also wore Nirvana Bourbon like a crazy person for, it was pretty much this or By the Fireplace I was wearing like every single day, because I was just really into them. And all my other fragrances kind of went by the wayside that year. But then I kind of snapped out of that, and then my perfume addiction came back, and that's when I really started buying a lot of full bottles. That's when I would go to TJ Maxx, and I was always finding, full bottles of perfume. And I started out having like a corner of my desk that was perfume, and then I had one of those IKEA 3-tray things. That got full, and then, yeah. And then I started filming perfume videos. And then it's really all been downhill because now I can justify buying perfume all the time, and I don't have to, I guess I just don't have to think about it. But yeah, I didn't actually start getting into, even though I don't know if I would consider Replica or Maison Margiela niche. I don't think I would. I think I would say they're definitely a designer. But I didn't start getting into niche fragrances at all until about maybe 2017 or 2018. yeah, it's only been a few years that I've been getting into niche fragrances at all. And I do love niche fragrances, but I'm definitely more discerning when it comes to them because number one, they're really, really expensive. Number two, some of them are not worth the money. And yeah, so I just have a really, I have a love-hate relationship with niche fragrances. But the ones that are like, the ones that I find incredible, I find incredible. And I think that they're worth every cent. And that is why one of my absolute favorite fragrances in the world is Zoologist Bee. This is just like the epitome of niche, of like niche fragrance artistry. It is, this is something that it's almost, like I almost can't put it into words because it's so unique and so incredibly complex. This is like honey and incense. It's a little bit animalic. It's like fragrance on another level. I didn't know that fragrances like this existed, like I said, until maybe 2018. And that's when I really started looking at fragrance as an art. And as much as I love all of these fragrances in front of me, as much as I adore designer fragrances, I love a great cheapie. I'm definitely not a perfume snob. I love a good dupe. I just love fragrance. If it smells good, I love it. And I rarely find a fragrance that I really, really hate. I just love perfume. But perfumes like these, this is an art. This is olfactive art. It's just on another level. And I have a great appreciation for this. I have a great appreciation for like Matthew Melleg's fragrances. He makes art in olfactive form. And I just think it's incredible. But anyways, yeah, this would be an example of something of a true niche fragrance that I really, really love. And this is where my fragrance journey definitely hasn't ended, but this is where my fragrance journey has taken me. So it's funny to know that it's come from this to this. It's just wild. But anyways, you guys, that is my fragrance journey story. I do hope this was a long one. If you hung in here for this whole video, I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope that you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe before you leave, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye.